Welcome to Figure Feedback. My name is Jeremy, and today I'm going to be doing a comparison between these two 3D printers. We got the Flashforge AD5X on the left and the WonderMaker ZR on the right. And I'm just doing this just for fun because I've been using both of these printers and I've enjoyed the time that I've had using both of them. And in fact, if you're curious about how each of these printers perform individually on their own, I'm going to leave links in the description because I did reviews for both of these printers. You'll be able to check them out and see how each of them stands up on their own. But, when I first saw this one, the WonderMaker ZR, one of the first things that came to my mind was, man, this kind of looks like a Flashforge AD5X. And as I learned more about it, I started to feel that in some ways, this is the type of printer that I wish the Flashforge AD5X was. And I know there's some people out there in the audience that thought similarly about the WonderMaker ZR. But first, before I really get down into it, let's just run down some really quick specs just to compare the two. Now, there's going to be a big difference just right off the bat, and that is clearly the size. I mean, just look at these two printers, with the WonderMaker ZR just being so much bigger than the old Flashforge AD5X. And a lot of that has to do with the build volume, because for the WonderMaker ZR, it has a maximum build volume of 300 millimeters cubed, whereas the Flashforge AD5X has a max build volume of 220 millimeters cubed. And that has always been one of the biggest downsides about the AD5X, as well as the Adventure 5M and 5M Pro, because the build volume is below average for the majority of 3D printers out there right now. But, check it out. If I just snatch this build plate off here, and snatch the build plate off here, I mean, just look at the difference in size between the two. The WonderMaker ZR is so much bigger than the AD5X as far as your build volume goes. So if you were into things like cosplay, because I always say these 300 millimeter cubed beds, they're like helmet class 3D printers, So if you wanted to print things like that, or things that are just quite large in general, then hey, this printer really is going to be the one to get. And as you see, as I put these build plates on, they both have these guides on the back of the build platform to make it really easy to align both of them so that you don't have to fiddle around and try to get them lined up properly. The other big difference between these two, and this is probably where the line is going to be drawn, is the price. So right now, as I record this, it's January 9th. The Flashforge AD5X you can purchase either from Amazon or directly from Flashforge for $339. There's a bit of a discount going on right now, I guess, because we're still sort of coming out of that holiday season in the new year. Whereas the WonderMaker ZR, you can find on Amazon, and when I checked, the price is $599. So it's quite a bit more expensive than the AD5X. And I think the WonderMaker ZR in general at this point in time is just a little bit too expensive, considering the fact that we're starting to move away from the single nozzle, multicolor filament systems that these two printers use, and going into tool head changers and nozzle changers, that kind of automatic system that prevents purge waste by like a lot. Some other differences between these two has to do with the software, and this is where the AD5X falls behind. They both run Clipper, which is great, but Flashforge doesn't let you really access Clipper. It's not open. So they've locked it down. They have their own UI. They have their own way of doing things. So you won't be able to change macros or values and things like that if you wanted to. If you really wanted to get into the system and tweak things, you can't really do that unless you download and install a community created mod for this. And then because that's a modification, implementation, your experience with it may vary. Whereas with the WonderMaker ZR, it's also built on Clipper, but it is not locked down. You can access it freely. You can get the IP address from the printer. You can type it into your web browser and it'll bring up the fluid interface. Or if you use Orca Slicer, you can import a profile that's already in Orca Slicer for the WonderMaker ZR. You can connect this to your network. You can type in the IP address in Orca Slicer, and then from the devices tab, you'll still have all of that same access. So it removes a lot of frustration as far as the desire to customize things for your liking. And I'm glad that they kept it open from that regard. So like I said, even though both of these are compatible with Orca Slicer, they both still have their own company branded versions of Orca Slicer. For the AD5X, they have Orca Flashforge, which is pretty much just Orca Slicer, except it's not as updated as Orca Slicer, and it gives you the ability to see what filaments you have loaded up in the printer directly from the devices page in Orca Flashforge, but you can't do that in Orca Slicer. WonderMaker has another version as well. I don't know the exact name. It's like WonderMaker Orca or some variant of that, but I've never downloaded it, so I don't know what it's like in there. But Orca Slicer works perfectly fine with the WonderMaker ZR. It also works fine with the AD5X as well. It's just that the AD5X lets you see more when it comes to the IFS and seeing what your filaments are and controlling the printer to a small degree, more than you would be able to do inside of the regular Orca Slicer. So earlier I mentioned how these two printers look similar, and a lot of that has to do with the multi-material / multicolor, whatever you're going to do, filament system that they both have. So on the WonderMaker ZR, you have these two modules that's on the left side. The one on the bottom is called the filament separator, and then the one up top is called the filament module. And basically the way that it works is you take whatever spool of filament that you have, you run it through the filament separator, and then once you get to the filament module, it's automatically going to kick in, it's going to grab the filament, and it's going to pull it through one of these tubes all the way down into the print head, and then it'll retract a little bit, and then you're able to go into the UI, tell the printer exactly what type of filament you put in it and the color of that filament. So you can use any of the 4 spools at any given time, either on their own, or if you want to do something to incorporate different materials into the same print or different colors into the same print, you will be able to do that with this printer, as well as the AD5X, which for some reason I only have 1 spool on here and it's pretty much empty, but this doesn't have a filament separator. Instead, it just uses this one module here that Flashforge calls the IFS, which stands for Intelligent Filament System, and it works pretty much the same as this module. You take your filament, you run it through the bottom, it detects it, and it pulls the filament down to the print head, it retracts it a bit, and then you go to the UI and tell the printer exactly what you loaded into it. Now, as far as this filament separator down here, I'm not exactly sure what it's for, but I have heard that the filament runout sensors are inside of the filament separator, whereas on the AD5X, the filament runout sensor is in the print head, and I actually prefer it to be inside of the print head. But yeah, this filament separator is just little weird quirk that the WonderMaker ZR happens to have. Also, as far as hardware goes, the WonderMaker ZR has a little bit more going for it. Now, they both are compatible with their own cameras that don't come with the printers. You can purchase them separately, and then you can connect the cameras to the printer, and then you'll be able to look at your prints as they're printing inside of the slicer. But the WonderMaker ZR does come with an LED light strip by default. The Flashforge does not have an LED light strip. You can fit one on there if you want, but it does not come with it by default. And then there's also this pretty decent sized auxiliary fan over here bolted to the side of the WonderMaker ZR. That's something that I believe all of them come with. So that's also pretty darn good. And then when it comes to the type of nozzles that you have to print with, the ZR and the 85X both come with 0.4 millimeter nozzles right out of the box, but the ZR has a hardened steel nozzle out of the box, whereas for the 85X, it is not hardened steel, but you can purchase a 0.6 and 0.8 millimeter hardened steel nozzle for the 85X, and then you can also purchase additional nozzles for the WonderMaker ZR as well. It's all pretty much the same sizes, 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8. That's just an option if you wanted to do that. But it's just easier to change the nozzle for the 85X because it doesn't require you to have any tools. They have this really easy system where you can just unlatch the nozzle, take it out, pop another one back in. It's magnetic and it just sticks into place, and you just use that clasp and that buckle to hold it down. Whereas it's not quite as simple on the ZR. It's not difficult, but you just have to unplug a component as well as taking the nozzle out. Like I said, it's not difficult to do, but it's not as easy as far as doing like a quick swap goes. So the 85X has the edge when it comes to that. Another edge that the WonderMaker ZR has over the 85X, at least in this earlier version of the 85X. This was one of like the first batches that came out, so I'm not sure if the later versions have changed anything, but the WonderMaker ZR, it's easier to remove these PTFE tubes, whether it's these four here or these up top or these that's going down into the print head. It's so much easier to just press down on these little coupler pieces and pull up the PTFE tube. It is exceedingly difficult to do that on the 85X, at least on this earlier version. I don't know if they changed it. It is extremely difficult. If I wanted to remove one of these tubes from the print head, you would think you would just have to push down the little circle piece and pull up this tube. And that's what you're supposed to do. But they're so tightly packed together, and they're also somewhat recessed, so that even when Flashforge showed how to take it out, they had to use a tool, the little cutters that normally come with your printer, and they had to use that to push this down, and you can see it was kind of shaking trying to take out this tube. And I'm like, man, that is way too much work to do something so simple. And it's done much easier on this particular printer. I hope Flashforge worked that out so that these tubes can be removed a lot easier. But on this earlier model, that just was not the case. But on the flip side, a advantage that the 85X has over the WonderMaker ZR has to do with the spool holders. Because as you can probably see for the ZR, these are just regular spool holders. They don't move, they don't do anything, they just stick on the side of the printer and they just stay there. And you have to put 2 reels of filament on each spool holder. That can be a problem because the one spool of filament could rub up against the other and it could cause it to rotate. That's one problem. The other problem is when it comes to retraction, there's nothing keeping tension on the filament as it retracts. And there have been incidents where, especially if the filament spool is kind of full, where it could retract and then the filament will basically go over the edge of the spool, and then that will cause a tangle. That could be resolved if it had these filament holders that sprung just like this. Now, the 85X didn't always have these. In the beginning, they had different spool holders that it rotated a little bit, but it still wasn't ideal. And Flashforge scrapped those. They came up with these new filament spool holders that are similar to what you will find on like the Bamboo Lab AMS Lite. And it's much better than what they had before. WonderMaker has created a printable solution to this issue with their spool holders that you could put together yourself. But as far as just having everything ready to go right out of the box, Flashforge has solved that problem with these new filament spool holders. And that makes it so that spools retracting and going over the edge is pretty much a non-issue with the 85X. But what is an issue is how close this filament module, the IFS rather, is to the filament spools. Now, If you have a plastic spool, it's going to barely miss clipping the edge of the IFS. But if you have certain cardboard spools and you have it in one of these top positions on the AD5X, then that cardboard spool could start grinding on the IFS as it's rotating. And as it continues to grind and wear down, it can leave a divot in the spool, and then it will make it so that it can't really be turned smoothly. And in some cases, it can't be turned at all. So that is an issue with this. It would be better if this IFS were moved up slightly just to give more clearance to the filament spools as they are rotating. That's not a problem at all on the WonderMaker ZR. There's plenty of space in between this filament separator and these spools so that they are not touching each other. You know, another thing that can happen if your spools cannot rotate freely, that means that, well, no filament can get through the nozzle, so you'll just start printing in midair. The AD5X does not have any way of detecting when you are not extruding filament out of the nozzle. It has absolutely no idea. It's going to just continue to try to print constantly because there's no kind of tangle detection. But the WonderMaker ZR does have tangle detection. It's tangle detection that has saved me a few times due to either a tangle in the spool or the aforementioned problem about the filament going over the edge and causing a tangle. It detected it before it got out of hand, and the printer will pause. It kept the heat bed on, and then when I would go to check on it, I would see that there's an error. It told me what the error was, and I did what I could to fix it, hit resume, and then just continue the print. Can't do that on the AD5X because once you start air printing, you're cooked. You can't do anything. You're going to have to scrap it and start all over again because there is no detection. And that's probably why this printer is as affordable as it is because it lacks those more, well, it's becoming more normal modern features such as filament tangle detection. It can't detect like spaghetti detection and that kind of like AI type of stuff. It just does not do that. There's no spaghetti detection on the WonderMaker ZR either, but just having something as simple as tangle detection will be extremely helpful. But unfortunately, AD5X just doesn't have it. But when you are printing with these two, you have your choice of some standard filaments that don't require heated chambers. Oh, and by the way, both of these printers do have enclosures that you can get. The AD5X's enclosure kit is around $40 to $50, and it's because they still require you to print the parts that you need in order to fix the panels to the printer. For the WonderMaker ZR, its enclosure kit is $150, but you don't have to print anything to get it to work. Everything comes in the box and you can just slap it right there on the printer. So you're paying more money for the convenience of not having to print parts yourself and worry about fitting it and worrying about tolerances and worrying about, failing and, stuff like that. So that is a good thing. Now, like I said, when you start printing, you have your choice of some standard filaments that you can use. Normally, it's just going to be PLA and variants of PLA, PETG, and TPU. No ABS, ASA, nylon. You can try if you want, but you're going to have a more difficult time because the enclosure is not there and it's not heated on the inside to keep that heat in, and those filaments benefit from that. But a big advantage that the AD5X has over the WonderMaker ZR is the fact that you can print TPU in this printer without doing anything fancy. You load up TPU in the IFS just like you would regular PLA. You don't have to take out any tubes. You don't have to run it directly into the print head with everything else disconnected. Nope, you run it straight through the IFS and you can print with it. I've been able to print successfully 95A TPU as well as 90A PEBA, and also I went all the way down to 85A PEBA. And I saw some defects when I went down to 85A. So 90A is where I would draw the line. You can print TPU on the WonderMaker ZR, but WonderMaker recommends that you run it directly into the print head and not through the filament separator and not through the filament module. So it's possible, but you got to undertake those additional steps. So that's a big advantage for the AD5X, because even more expensive printers, even like the Bamboo Lab H2D, H2C, you know, even that printer will not let you, or they just do not recommend that you run regular TPU through, say, the AMS if you have one. They have you running it through a separate inlet in order to go directly into the print head. And the fact that you can do this on the AD5X without doing anything fancy is a huge deal. The only other printer that I personally use that lets you print TPU as easily as that, just like with any other filament, running through a single multi-color, multi-tool changing type of system, is the SnapMaker U1, where you can load up 95A TPU into that and print it just as normally as you would anything else. And I've done that and I've had success with it. So even though this is a small, quite inexpensive printer, it does do that one thing better than most, even some of the larger, more expensive printers out there. And then the most important thing about these two printers is going to be print quality. How does that print quality hold up? In my experience using these two, they both print really good as far as the quality goes. I'll put up some footage of past videos that I did so that you can see the print quality coming from each of these. They are very, very comparable. I think that as far as consistency goes, you probably get a more consistent print quality out of the AD5X, because the WonderMaker ZR, it's kind of weird because some people that have this printer have had an awful time with it. And then people like me, which seems to be, not as many people, have had little to no problems with it. So it just kind of feels safer for the AD5X that things are more dialed in, things are a little bit more predictable. Of course, anomalies are going to happen from time to time. But, if you get a good WonderMaker ZR, like the one that I have, print quality is just, it's nice. It's fine. It's good. I don't have any problem with it. But if I had to pick which one of these printers prints the nicest, I think I would give the slightest edge to the Flashforge AD5X, just slightly, in particular when it comes to printing things that are flat, because I find that with the WonderMaker ZR, with ironing turned off, I can see a little bit more of, those lines on the top layers of models, whereas they're not as pronounced on the AD5X. So we'll give it a slight edge to the AD5X, but they both print really good in my experience. The build plates have done a great job with adhesion. No glue, nothing like that to help with adhesion. Just putting up the bed temperature to the appropriate level, making sure that it's clean from time to time, and just running prints on it. And everything for the most part has just been absolutely fine. No problem with that at all. So, when it really just comes down to it, which printer is the best? All things considered, man, I'm just thinking about this now, and I didn't come to that conclusion before I started this video. There's trade-offs between these two. I like the fact that it's easier to work with some of the hardware components with the WonderMaker ZR than it is with the AD5X. It's easier on the AD5X to print TPU as opposed to the WonderMaker ZR. It's great that you can be saved if your filament is tangled on the ZR, but you don't have that kind of security net with the AD5X. It's give and take, but like I said in the beginning, I think the biggest factor is going to be the price. $600, I think, is too expensive right now in this point in time for this printer, even if you get a good one, because moving away from the single nozzle stuff, we're going into the different tool heads and things like that. And I know those type of printers are going to be more expensive than $500 for the most part. But since WonderMaker is still a brand new company, who kudos to them, crowdfunded in order to get this printer out there, as well as their own tool changing printer that's coming out very soon, which is called the ZR Ultra. The fact that they got that money, they didn't suffer a crazy long amount of delays, and they have a working product, and they're going to have another working product coming out. I mean, that's commendable. So that is really, really great. Still a young company, still a lot of growing to do if they can stay in the game. And I think that this is a very solid first effort. But it's also because of that, it can be a harder sell because they don't have the background to assure you that they're either still going to be around in a few months and they're still going to be supporting the printer. You just don't really know. Whereas you have a little bit more, well, you got a decent amount more security when it comes to Flashforge, because Flashforge has been around for a long time. And I don't see them leaving the game anytime soon. But one more thing that I do have to mention is the software, as far as what goes on behind the scenes to keep the printer running. The weakest feature of Flashforge printers is the software, in the form of like the firmware updates. Too many times have firmware updates messed up these printers as far as like their print quality goes and the order of operations in which it does things. And one of the more recent firmwares that Flashforge put out, a lot of people were complaining that it made their Adventure 5M not work as well as it did before, and they had to roll it back. And that's always a fear with a firmware update coming from Flashforge, that it could just completely mess things up. Now, fortunately, you can roll it back, but it's definitely made me hesitant to ever update my Flashforge printers if they aren't experiencing an issue, because I don't want to deal with having to roll anything back. I don't want to have to deal with any problems with things not working as well as they did before. So if the firmware update does not bring something massive to the printer, or if it doesn't solve a huge problem that I'm having, I just tend to ignore it. The verdict's still out with WonderMaker. I have not gotten a single over-the-air firmware update for this, so I don't know how they're going to handle it. But all in all, these are still really good printers. Metal frames, they're magnetic, they are a joy to work with and use if you happen to get a good one. So yeah, that's it. I'm not expecting anyone to actually want to compare these two printers because you want to buy one or the other, given the big price difference between the two and the other options that you have out there. But just in case you found yourself curious because you thought that they looked the same or very similar, well, this is my opinion on how they stack up next to each other. So that's going to do it for now. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and I'll speak to you soon.